Hello everyone, I am Tacet and I hope you all are having a wonderful new year. So as our final video for the year of 2017, I figured we'd go over all of the most consequential troops that were added into the game as far as them changing up the meta, being viable in some sort of particularly niche way, or just being useful in general. So we have all the dates of when they came out, as well as pairing up similar troops that instead of just mentioning them multiple times so that we can mention just a few more. I think we have about 20 of them, even though it is a top 10 list. We could have probably done more towards about 40 or so, but yeah, there was a lot of really good troops that came out this year. Not so much from Kingdoms, but definitely from the events themselves. So let's get into it. All the way at number 10 on January 8th and on August 28th. We have Rock Spirit and Sunbird, both of which really changed up things in early game. Rock Spirit has a very decent board control, has split damage, both of them have split damage, as well as a very solid boost ratio at 4 times. So if you're going to be hitting about 5 rounds every single time with this, that alone is additional 20 damage. And of course, early on in the game, 20 damage is a pretty substantial amount. Not only that, but it can also extra turn off of its destroy row and column. This is destroy, so it also gets to accumulate all of that mana when it does so, and it will generally accumulate almost all of its mana every single time you cast it. You place it with a deep board, does insane amount of damage, at least for the early game scene. So it has really become a vital troop for all newer players to try to get. It's an ultra rare, so a little bit harder to get, but generally once people start getting into gem key openings, they will start getting their first Rock Spirit, which shouldn't take too long. Similarly, Sunbird, also an ultra rare, does split damage again, but is more of a mid to late game option, though it still can be used in early game. It deals damage randomly split among all enemies, but then has a boost ratio based on its life at a 1-to-1. There is already a troop that is capable of doing this slightly, and that is Bold Taurus. But this is quite a bit better because it gets to kill itself every single time afterwards. This is normally important because there are various traits that trigger when one of your ally dies, and it even has one on itself, summon a Firestorm, which will end up synergizing with that. Not only that, but you can use this as a frontline tank by using the little bit of armor that it does have to basically keep tanking with and just keep reviving your Sunbird with every single cast, allowing you to essentially take no damage, assuming you're only taking frontline damage. So you can keep using this similar to how you would use a transforming troop to get a brand new fresh troop, because every single time it casts, it'll go right back to these stats every single time, and you can just keep spamming that to keep reviving it. So under number 9, we have March 5th and July 31st, and we have the barrier spams instead of split damages. Now we have the barriers, both of which are good, particularly throughout the entire game. Dragonian Monk places barrier on your entire team. He is also the only troop currently in the game that has a X-shaped destroy. It's also destroy, so you accumulate the mana. So instead of a plus like the Rock Spirit does, this thing does a X, and there are a lot of very, very strange things that you can do with the X. He's probably one of the hardest board controls to use in the game, if not the absolute hardest. But once you get a hang of it, it is pretty fun to use. You can get a full barrier onto your team. Every single yellow that it ends up removing or destroying from the board, it will give a barrier to your allies. So if you do 4 of them, you will guarantee barrier up your entire team. Similar to this is a Dwarven Gate with a very, very high mana accumulation. It gives all other allies other than itself 5 mana, which is 15 mana for only a 10 mana cost. That alone is pretty decent. On top of that, it also gains a pretty competent armor boost for itself, and this is based on Dwarven allies. If you happen to be using it with a Dwarf team, or if you're using multiple Dwarven Gates, it also stacks with itself. And it also gives all other allies a barrier, which is similar to Dragonian Monk, except it doesn't give itself a barrier, whereas Dragonian Monk can. Though if you're using double Dwarven Gate, you can simply just use the Dwarven Gate boost ratio that it has, combined with the fact that you just cast both of them, and then that will then barrier your entire team, including the 2 Dwarven Gates you have. So next up on our list, we have at number 8 on July 23rd and October 20th, the new mechanics that came out this year of Dispel. Dispel, what it does is removes all positive stats effects from the enemy, so just like on the previous ones where we had a bunch of barriers that we could use, if we were to use a Dispel on them, we would be able to remove them. Wisp. So Wisp has been a lot better when it initially came out, though it is still a pretty noteworthy troop of the year due to how insanely broken it was when it did come out. It was 9 mana cost, empowered, and it had a magic link, and that was before all the links got nerfed as well. So it was pretty powerful. At this current moment in time, of course, it did get nerfed quite a bit, though it is still the cheapest Dispel all in the game, as well as the second cheapest Charm and the cheapest Jumble. So it still has quite a bit of utilities going for it, but it just does a lot of various different things to your enemy. Pretty useful that it automatically has the extra turn. While it doesn't have Empowered anymore, it does basically only take one swipe to get it up, and it's still stealthy, so you can't get it like single target mana drained or anything like that. Though Azura is personally my favorite pick for this now. Azura is arguably the best Kingdom epic now when she was added with the Merlantis Kingdom. And this is mainly because she has an Explode all to blues. This is useful because this is not affected by her magic. So even if her magic is reduced down to 0, she will still be able to explode every single blue on the board. What's also pretty useful about this is regardless of what your level is or how many magic kingdoms or anything about your stats, you'll still be able to explode all the blues because this isn't associated with anything. It'll automatically do it, whereas things like Ragnagord, Gorgoltha, and most of the other ones have their explosions based on their magic or some kind of other source. This has it automatically, so you will never need to worry about getting less explosions unless they happen to, of course, remove all the blues. But on top of that, it also gets to dispel all enemies, similar to the Wisp, but it also gets a stat reduction, which makes it very similar to that of a Plague, except it's a lot cheaper than a Plague to obtain. And what's pretty nice about it too is you don't even need traits for it to be viable, which is good, because normally you don't want to be trading epics because they are quite expensive. So for May 5th, July 7th, and November 23rd, we got a bunch of damage sources. I was going to mention all of these separately, but they were just going to take up too many slots, so I just put them all together. These were basically the 3 highest damage outputting troops that were added to the game. There were a few other ones like Uriali and stuff and Yasmin's Chosen that were pretty competent as well, though I would consider these to be the biggest 3. Grim got a lot of use mainly because it has a attack reduction, so that helped make sure that Skull Spam would never really be around. As Impervious, so against Queen Mab, Kraken combos, it was fending pretty well. And it has an infinite purple loop, so if you just keep getting your purple going with something like a Flame Troll or any kind of other troop, maybe a Dark Troll or really anything Giant Spider that can really get this thing going, Apothecary, all the general things that give it mana, and you just get it looping, boom, and you synergize it with something that can burn, like a Yarrow Fire Mantle or an Infernus, and you're good to go on your infinite loop. Speaking of Infernus, we got Infernus. He was also buffed soon after he was released, I think a couple months after, to get even more damage, which I don't really think he needed, but yeah, he got even more damage. One other pretty noteworthy thing about all 3 of these, including the Infernus, though he does it the worst of the 3, is they all have a chance of gaining an extra turn because they have some kind of board control. Grim has infinite purple, Infernus has a 5 explosion into ideally a Firestorm automatically, and the Worldbreaker just has a gigantic amount of explosions. So you get a lot of value out of these, as more often than not, they will be able to multicast their ability, and given that their abilities already do such excessively high damage, then it works out pretty nice. But yes, he also has a burn to all enemies. This synergizes pretty well with Grim, as well as anything that can utilize the fact that your entire team, or the entire enemy team, is burning. And the automatic Firestorm combined with explosions, it's generally a pretty good idea to have explosions whenever you have a storm, because it will slightly increase your chance of actually gaining an extra turn, and he does that automatically, assuming he will get a kill, and Infernus is most likely going to get a kill. And finally, we have Worldbreaker, currently the highest mana cost troop in the game, if I'm not mistaken. I don't think there was one higher. No, pretty sure that is the highest. And he has 18 Gem Explosion, and similarly, this is not based on magic, similar to how Azura was, so you will always have these 18 explosions, and then it also gets a very competent amount of damage to all enemies. And this, combined with the fact that it can gain even more stats, and the fact that it still has the Kraken anti with the anti-devour as well, makes it a pretty decent troop for just dealing loads and loads of damage. And once you get it looping with something, you're pretty much just good to go for the entire battle to just automatically win it. All very, very, very heavy extra turn damage sources that have basically become vital for endgame play for winning quickly. Next up, we have one of my personal favorites. I would probably put this at number 1. Firebomb really caught me off guard when he ended up coming out. I was not expecting him to be as good as he actually is. Similar to the Infernus, he basically has the same amount of explosions. Instead of 5 random ones, he does 4 specifically to reds on the board. He then does a pretty trivial amount of damage and then destroys itself. This is somewhat useful that it ends up destroying itself, though, for a couple of reasons. One, it has Empowered, so basically what you can do is accumulate a lot of mana by using this, and then you have a slot clear. So if you have something that can summon, well, you could just summon something right into that slot that you just cleared out. So not only did you get yourself a burst of mana right at the beginning of the battle, but you also got yourself a little clear spot that you can start summoning in if you need it. Not really that good in Guild Wars, though he excels particularly well in challenges, quests, and in Explore, all three of which he is one of the best troops to even use, as in those kind of content you want to win as quickly as you possibly can against relatively weak troops. So with something like a Firebomb to feed into something like a Sunbird or Rowan or anything else that can do a really decent amount of damage that can just 1 to 2 shot the entire enemy team, works out really nice and has become pretty vital in the quicker battles and has basically made Bombbot obsolete. Wouldn't say that Bombbot is completely obsolete now, but definitely a lot less viable than he was compared to the fact that you can now just use Firebomb instead. Next up on number 5 from January 1st and August 14th, we have also on November 19th, we have the 3 trolls that ended up coming in this year. They also all got buffed to now do double the amount of gems plus 3. At one point this was also double the amount of gems plus 4, but it was toned down a little bit because that was a little much. But yeah, Dark Troll and Farrish Troll in particular were the 2 really big ones. This one came out on January 5th and was basically one of the first troops that came out in the year. Actually, I think I said that wrong. Isn't that January 1st? I forget when it came out, but it was one of the 2. No, it was January 1st. I read that wrong. Yeah, it's January 1st. He was the first troop that came out this year on the very first day of last year. But yes, he is quite noteworthy because out of all 6 of the trolls, for whatever reason, he has a soul gain. So all the trolls do double of a certain color, plus 3. And that's it. But this guy, for whatever reason, also gets souls, which is cool. So kind of like a little bit of a Valkyrie there in his ability. He also has some pretty decent traits, so the really MVP of all the trolls would have to be Farrish Troll, mainly because of what it can be synergized with. Even though it's no different in its ability, the fact that it can do it on green is pretty vital, as that can be used with Kraken teams. It can also be used with Yasmin, Web Spinner, and quite a few other teams that might need to utilize a lot of greens. Not only that, he is also pretty tanky in the fact that he can entangle whenever he does a skull, as well as just naturally having 33% skull reduction with a 3 life regeneration per turn. Also, all the trolls this year ended up getting a 3 regeneration instead of their 1 that they used to have before, which is pretty decent since you can gain quite a bit of life that way if they happen to be missing any. So January 4th, I couldn't not put this in, Princess Elspeth. The amount of times she has been used this year in very, very weird teams is amazing. I didn't really think too much of her when she first came out, though I did think she was going to be used for something pretty broken, and yes, she was. The most common thing that she really got used with for when she came out, or soon after she came out, when the Guild War troops started coming in, was basically you use a pure color Guild War troop with a troop that can one-shot, let's say, for example, a Crimson Bat with 2 penguins. You just use the Princess Elspeth, kill out the 1 penguin, and then boom, you just basically got yourself a Crimson Bat that can now have a much higher amount of damage due to the extra that it got from the penguins, and you can win out battles pretty quickly with that. One other pretty interesting combo that came out of this was using the new Death Knight hero class that has Death Mark to all enemies. You kill that out while it's using a pure purple weapon, and then you get yourself a bunch of purple. But what you also use is a sacrifice, and that sacrifice will then cast, and it has a boost ratio based on Death Marked enemies, and you can use that with something, again, like a Crimson Bat, and basically one-shot the entire enemy team out of pure true damage. But yeah, Elspeth has done a lot of really strange things. The strangest would probably have to be, I think, the 3.05 patch or 3.1, I forget specifically which, but for about 1 day, she had the ability to instantly kill anything on the opposing team. And for that amount of time, for those 24 hours, she was the most broken troop to ever exist in this game, essentially having an empowered ability that could one-shot any enemy at will, while also simultaneously summoning a knight ally to your team if you happen to have been missing a spot somehow. But yeah, she essentially just used 4 of them, killed them all out. That lasted for a very, very short amount of time, obviously, but for that time, she did become the best troop in the game, though it was pretty short-lived. Okay, next up on August 30th and November 5th and 7th, we technically only have 1, and it technically is also not even a troop, though it is very noteworthy. It is the Dawnbringer. This, as this current moment in time, is the most expensive item you can build in Gems of War, and you can build it in the Soul Forge for 1.3 million souls, a very whopping high amount of souls among a few other resources. but it has single-handedly completely broken any meta that still existed within, or balance I should say, or lack thereof at this point, that existed within Arena. Dawnbringer just absolutely crushes it in record time, and they've been trying to figure out how on earth to fix it because of how ridiculously overpowered Dawnbringer is in that situation. Not only that, but it has found its way into various PvP teams. It's pretty noteworthy in that if you don't have Sun and Moon and Fire and Ice, it is basically the only yellow and blue weapon that hits full AoE. So given that it is a full AoE weapon that can be used on those colors that don't really have any other options, it makes for a pretty commonly used weapon when you need a hero class, but you just happen to need a yellow or blue. Since there isn't any other option, well, you kind of have to go with Dawnbringer in most of those instances. But yeah, it gives a barrier to all allies, it has a very high amount of damage output, and it even gains additional magic if there happens to be enough reds on the board. There's a little bit of everything, very, very powerful. They may be adding more into the future, and we'll definitely have to see how those pan out. But at this current moment in time, it is the only mythic weapon in the game, and it might stand that way for a little while. Those other dates that I had there were the dates that the Bard class and the Bard class and the Dragon Guard class were added to the game, both of which are two of the strongest hero classes that currently exist. Dragon Guard ends up giving you it's the only hero class with skull mitigation at 40%. It also ends up giving dragons 1 life and 1 magic every single time you get an extra turn. The other one is a Bard, which essentially the main thing with that is it has immune to silence, as well as a +1 to all +1 to all stats to all yellow allies, which is also quite effective. Unfortunately, you can't use multiple heroes on your team, but it is still pretty nice having the one. Next up, on January 19th, pretty early, it came in, and it is a Christinax, probably my favorite dragon to really use in the game, except maybe a Dragon Soul, but it deals a very, very high amount of full AoE damage. It has this boosted based on a 2-to-1 boost ratio on the board control that you remove from the board. So it has board control, it has full AoE, it has a decent boost ratio, and on top of all that, it also has a summon, which has played a pretty big role in Guild Wars, since you could easily place this into many teams and you just get yourself a summon. Not only that, but it is currently the only viable option that has a automatic enchant. I believe there is one other one, and that is Asha, which was also added this year. Actually, the entire mechanic of enchant was added this year, but Asha can do it as well, but it doesn't really use that as well because Asha accumulates mana when it does its ability, and generally with enchant you don't need both a mana generation and an enchant. You mainly just need an enchant on abilities or on troops that need the mana. If they're already going to get all their mana filled from some kind of ability, you don't also need the enchant, so Asher doesn't really get used. But with Christinax, definitely very viable. Somehow, even though this was added all the way at the beginning of the year, it is still basically the only thing that ever gets ran that has the enchant. There is something that is going to be coming in next month, but basically it is going to last an entire year as the only viable enchant, which seems a little bit weird. It's one of the reasons why you don't really see the mechanic around, because yeah, you basically have Christinax as essentially your only option, and on top of that it also has Stone Skin and immune to Entangle, so very commonly used in a first slot just as a frontline tank. Also pretty commonly used on teams that you're basically blocking all of its colors, but because it has a automatic enchant, you can still get its ability up in 8 turns, or less if you happen to get additional accumulation. So, what is the #1 troop for 2017? It came in pretty early. It was the 3rd troop that came in this year, and I actually didn't even realize this was this year. I thought this came in the last year, but when I made this list, yes, he does indeed came in earlier this year. And it is none other than Farrish Ra. Yeah, this was pretty much a bound to be coming. He is good in so many countless ways. One thing that's pretty funny though that I should mention, he came in at the beginning of the year, yet he also came in at the end of the year, because most people didn't really get the opportunity to get a Farrish Ra until December. So it's kind of weird. He both began and ended the year. Also, it's pretty funny because he has a solar eclipse, and there was also a solar eclipse that went through the United States this year as well. So he's just all 27 memed out then perfectly. So what does he actually do? He transforms all yellows to purple, and then deals a very, very competent amount of damage to a single target, and this is boosted by souls, which is why it's a competitive amount. So basically every soul you have, you do a 1-to-1 boost ratio. But he has 150% bonus to his souls, so that is 121 damage right there, just with one Farrish Ra, enough to one-shot most things within the game, and with a AoE is enough to one-shot everything within the game. Not only that, he gains enough souls so that if you cast them twice, he would reach the max capacity of souls, and of course, as I showed over here, he has a 150% soul gain. He is the only troop currently in the game that basically reduces the amount of time you need to grind resources by obtaining it. There are technically other ones that could be considered under that category too, like for example mythics that help you win PvP very quick, but there's always going to be options that win PvP quickly. There isn't necessarily going to be an option that literally increases the amount of resources you gain. There's no other way to really gain your cap this high. You can use necromancies, but most teams running multiple necromancy are pretty clunky and will not win as quickly. But with the Necromancer, Farrish Ra doesn't really have much of a hindrance in winning, at least within challenges and stuff. In PvP, using more than one normally isn't that good of an idea, but still, just always throwing him into just one of them into a team just gives you such a decent amount of passive souls, and will really reduce down the total amount of time you need to grind souls. Having multiple of them can more than half the amount of time you would need to go out of your way to go farm souls for all the things you might need, like Dawnbringer, leveling every single troop in the game to 20, and stuff like that. He's generally, you should try getting him as quickly as you possibly can. He is similar to that of the Dragon Armor, Celestial Armor, Death Knight Armor, and all that kind of stuff, and you basically want to rush it as immediately as you possibly can. He also stands as the most valuable thing you could possibly craft out of diamonds, which is the new resource that came in this year through the dungeon system, so you definitely want to go and invest it into Farrish Ra the first time you ever see him, or simply just save all of those resources specifically for just crafting Farrish Ra's. But anyways, that is my list of the top 10, kind of 20, troops in the game that were very vital and changed up the meta, or were just really interesting to the whole game as far as changing what was really used. Of course, many events come and by and go and basically don't really make that big of an impact, but essentially every single one of these shown are very nice troops to have, try to look out for, and just to build up into really, really interesting teams that were able to be crafted this year. But anyways, guys, that wraps it up for 2017. Next time we will meet, it will be 2018. I hope you all have a wonderful New Year's. If you still have any other questions, feel free to leave it in the comment section below. Stay safe, everyone, and I will see you all later in 2018. Goodbye, everyone.